Good evening, campers. It's me, Kieran, and today we're going to finally finish this triptych of videos of classics that I think you must read. We've covered the classics, we've covered the modern classics, and today we're going to move into the almost oxymoronic contemporary classics. As always, before I start my list, let me know down below in the comments what your 10 would be. But before we begin, let's talk about the three caveats. The first one is that I am defining the contemporary classics as anything from the first day of the year 2000 up until now, 2022. The second caveat is that I'm not saying that these are the best. I'm not saying that all of these are my favourite. These are classics that I think you must read in order to give yourself a good, solid foundation in order to continue your reading journey. Lastly, the third caveat is that I must have read these. If I haven't read it or I didn't finish it, it's not on this list. So let's begin. At the beginning of the 21st century, the internet was not as established as it was today, and the idea of what an electronic novel, the idea of a hypermedia novel was still somewhat being suggested. And in 2001, Caitlin Davis wrote These Waves of Girls. As this work is a hypermedia electronic novel, yes, I will leave the URL where you can actually read it online. There is no physical copy of this book. To explain These Waves of Girls would be to simply say that it is a fragmented, short story narrated from three ages of the same girl questioning her sexuality. However, you're going to have to read certain things, you're going to have to jump into hyperlinks, you're going to have to watch things, you're going to have to listen to things in order for the story to not be uncovered, but for the story to be built upon. As we move through the 21st century, as we live in a hypermedia state, the ideas of what challenges what a novel is and what it should be and how it functions and how it is formed and how it is presented to readers begins to be challenged. It's something that the contemporary classics are continuing to do. Therefore, let's continue to abandon the novel. Let's jump 2 years to 2003, where Marjane Satrapi releases the graphic memoir Persepolis. Persepolis was a book of one of its kind. It really started this idea of the graphic memoir. And for a medium that isn't really taken seriously, Persepolis is dealing with topics that are oh so serious, that are oh so relevant. These topics are still as crucial today for Iranian women as they were back for Satrapi. How Satrapi is able to interrogate and depict Iranian culture and politics over 200 years in amongst discussing her family, but really how it relates all to her, how she feels about all of it and the trials and tribulations that come from it. I think Persepolis should be a classic that everyone should read. Let's move back to a traditional novel about a topic that some people might be questioning why we haven't already addressed it, and that is 9/11. I do want to preface this by saying two things. One, I am not American, and two, when the Twin Towers fell, I was 7. Therefore, although 9/11 is within my lifetime, it wasn't something that we were really taught about. Obviously, we knew what 9/11 was and we could discuss what happened, but the one that was able to speak to me the best about articulating 9/11 was Fallen Man by Don DeLillo. The protagonist of Fallen Man is Keith, who has survived 9/11, and DeLillo depicts what happens afterwards. And really at the heart of Fallen Man is, can art, or maybe even should art, depict terror? Should we be trying to encapsulate it? And what feels like a very meandering book, I think will resonate with people who are outside of America, where we feel as though we understand what has happened and we can process what has happened, but trying to understand what 9/11 meant almost feels unachievable, unobtainable. I do feel Americans might have a completely different view when it comes to Fallen Man. They might see it pallid, they might feel it nondescript, but I think that works in Don DeLillo's favour. The next three contemporary classics all started in 2009. It was a very good year, apparently, according to me. And the first one is the absolute tome that is My Struggle by Carl Uwe Knausgaard. Why I think My Struggle is so important is that with the rise of autofiction, I think Knausgaard really pushes the idea of what autofiction is. What should it be? What should it do? In order to keep this video as short as possible, I did an entire video series where I've read all of My Struggle, so I will leave that video down below. The next book is the keystone of what historical fiction is now set up against. Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. Is anyone going to argue, despite Wolf Hall's flaws and the fact that everyone is called Thomas, Wolf Hall is a masterpiece? If you're only going to read one Mantel book in your lifetime, Wolf Hall is the book. The next contemporary classic started in 2009 and subsequently finished in 2016. This is the internet novel. There is a resurgence of trying to articulate that within the written word, within the novel form, but really the internet novel has to be Homestuck. Homestuck is the Ulysses of the internet. This is a story that is over 8,000 pages long. It is hypermedia, it is multimedia, it is everything about early 2010s internet culture combined into a story. To surmise the plot of Homestuck is quite difficult, but here we go. On his 13th birthday, John Egbert receives a beta copy of the game Spurbs, which opens up multiple parallel universes and a lot of shenanigans begin. The narrative process of Homestuck builds upon web comics and flash animation. We have reels of message boards, we have forums, we have point and click, we have vast sequences that we have to sit through. We have audio, we have visual, we have a teleporting dog, we have that Game of Thrones like where everyone just dies. I will leave a link to Homestuck down below so you can click and start viewing it. The only problem is with Homestuck is that due to flash animation not really being a thing anymore, some of Homestuck is broken, it's defunct. But you know what? Happy with the fragments of Sappho? Surely we could be happy with the fragments of Homestuck. The early 2010s we had the Arab Spring, and reflecting on that in 2013 we have the Kafkaesque dystopian by Egyptian writer Basma Abdel Aziz. Aziz's novel The Queue talks about people who are waiting to enter the gate, a building that is currently rewriting events. A riot has occurred, but they advise no one was shot. Propaganda is put out to say that no one is allowed to remove bullets. X-rays are confiscated without proof that anyone was shot. Then really it never happened. It's worth noting that Aziz, being Egyptian, was writing this novel at the time that the Muslim Brotherhood was gaining prominence, and these bullet wounds that are clearly visible to everyone is actually passed off as a religious sign from God. The Queue, through the Kafkaesque and the use of the surreal and absurd, showcases that under the Arab Spring the governments, the ruling bodies, dehumanized their citizens with governmental propaganda that sought to negate and almost redact people's emotions, people's feelings about what was currently going on. In 2016, the poet K. Tempest dropped their album Let Them Eat Chaos. Yes, we have what the Nobel Prize did with Bob Dylan. We have music on this list. There is a performance of Let Them Eat Chaos on YouTube, and I have linked that down below for you to listen and enjoy. And by gosh, Tempest is an absolute outstanding poet. The Poet Society gave Tempest the accolade of Next Generation Poet, which they only give out once a decade. Let Them Eat Chaos talks about a British street of people who have never really interacted with each other before, but a storm occurs early morning and they all finally meet each other. There's nothing grand about these people. There's nothing special about them. In fact, they're ordinary British people. And these everyday people get their kicks from doing very ordinary things. Tempest, through their lyricism and through the addition of music, makes an absolute... It's just superb. If you've never heard of Tempest before, you're going to be wondering why you've never heard of them. Next, we have the incendiary novel by Ukrainian writer, poet and musician Sergei Zhadan with The Orphanage. Shaddan's The Orphanage is brutality incarnate. You as the reader, just like the protagonist, has no idea what on earth is going on within the Donbass region as the shells, as the armies, and as the soldiers from both the Ukrainian and the Russian sides start shooting at each other. The fog of war that blurs everything within The Orphanage makes you understand how contested the Donbass region is. The Orphanage is an eye-opening book, it is a brutal book, and it's a necessary book. The last book on this list is a COVID novel, first published in 2020 and translated into English in 2021. That is the Russian author's Lyudmila Ulitskaya's Just the Plague. Like the barrage of COVID novels that are currently hitting the market and what are subsequently going to continue on throughout the years, Ulitskaya talks about the virus from a different time and shows the parallels that is going on between the citizens and the people in power. Just the Plague starts off with a vaccine researcher who is called away to go to an important meeting at the capital in Moscow. Unbeknownst to the vaccine researcher, because they're asymptomatic, have started to spread a plague around Moscow. And yes, this actually did happen in Stalin's time. The government at the time, in order to stop the spreading of this disease, decides to quarantine their citizens. Throughout this novel, Ulitskaya blends together a wonderful embodiment of wit and black humour, because guess who's really good at tracing people who might have the virus? It's the NKVD. Problem arises when the NKVD leader believes that the people they are rounding up are going to be liquidated like the previous purges, and those who have been rounded up also believe that they are part of the purges. And we have scenes of people writing out their confessions, saying goodbye to their loved ones, trying to escape, all because of miscommunication from the government. Just the Plague is interesting because it's talking about the bubonic plague in the midst of the current pandemic, but again, the parallels between how the government doesn't help its people, how the miscommunications from people in power ultimately impact the citizens vastly more, and really showcases that the people in power sometimes just didn't really know what was the best way to deal with the situation. And there we go, 10 of the contemporary classics that I think you should read. Let me know down below what your 10 would be and what ones do you completely disagree with me on.